Good morning, everyone, to this exciting second morning of the Global Alcohol Policy Conference 2013 in this vibrant city of Seoul. And I had a great pleasure giving this opportunity to chair this interesting session of plenary this morning. We got three most outstanding keynote speakers from three regions of the world. Professor Thomas Baber from the States, and Dr. Evelyn Gillen from Scotland, and lastly, Professor Charles Perry from South Africa. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Thomas Baber. The light is horrible. I think all of us know him very well from his work, particularly on his book on alcohol, No Ordinary Commodity. Tom Baber is currently a professor and chairman in the Department of Community Medicine and Healthcare, University of Connecticut School of Medicine. So, Tom, please.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to speak this morning. In keeping with the topic that has been assigned to me and the theme of the conference, I'm going to give you a potpourri, a Korean hot pot of public health and civil society and global change and national and international and local action. The topic is the global response to the WHO alcohol strategy, which we've heard about time and again yesterday in different presentations. And what I'm going to suggest is that out of the global strategy is a growing tension between the public health community and the alcohol industry, which is going to determine the future of alcohol problems globally, I think, for quite some time. A brief history of recent public health initiatives and how they interact with the alcohol industry can be seen from this highly selective chronology. Starting in 1975, when the World Health Organization and the Finnish Foundation for Alcohol Research did a review, an international review of the policy, literature, and epidemiological data. And they published a monograph called Alcohol Control Policy and Public Health Perspective. And this book was very influential because it, for the first time, identified per capita alcohol consumption as a major driving force in the development of problems at a population level in a given country. As a follow-up to that study, Griffith Edwards in 1994, along with a group of people who later, many of whom later continued to work on these policy monographs, put together a sequel to the purple book, Alcohol Control Policy, which was called Alcohol Policy and the Public Good. And that book updated the literature, traced the epidemiological data indicating areas of concern in different parts of the world, and formulated a response on a public health level to alcohol problems. By that time, the alcohol industry was very concerned about the public health community, and they were so concerned that just prior to the publication of that book, they obtained secretly a copy and approached a number of academics offering to pay them lucrative stipends in order to write anonymous critiques of the book and perhaps helped to publish a rival monograph. That was exposed. It led to a expose in the national press in the UK, and it was a very good thing for book sales because the first edition sold out immediately. Also in 1994, perhaps not by coincidence, the International Center for Alcohol Policies was established in Washington, D.C. with an international purview, and this organization was funded by a consortium of major alcohol producers. We subsequently learned that one of the factors that led to the formation of ICAP was the concern by the tobacco industry that at that time owned some of the alcohol companies, that the problems experienced by the tobacco industry should be avoided by setting up these kinds of social aspect organizations to protect them from public health policies that might be detrimental to their financial interests. In 2000, as we know, GAPA was formed, the Global Alcohol Policy and Alliance, to reach out and coordinate and work with different groups around the world in the area of alcohol policy. In 2003, another update of this monograph series was published, the first edition of Alcohol, No Ordinary Commodity, put together by a group of 13 public health career scientists mostly, who looked at the literature and made conclusions about the science base for effective alcohol policy. In 2008, WHO, being as they were encouraged by the World Health Assembly, began planning the global strategy on the reduction of harmful use of alcohol. And about that time, the industry accelerated their efforts in order to deal with both the public relations issues and the political issues around alcohol control. In 2010, the global strategy was published by WHO. In 2012, the global producers issued at a press conference in Washington a set of commitments, 10 commitments, and subsequent to that, they posted over 2,500 actions to reduce harmful drinking, all in response to the WHO global strategy. In 2013, based on discussions among a number of public health advocates and academics, NGO representatives, the commitments were critically evaluated in the form of a statement of concern that was supported or organized and coordinated by GAPA, and subsequent to that, as Derek Rutherford mentioned yesterday, there was a meeting to discuss this petition with the WHO Director General, Margaret Chan, in Geneva. This is an indication of how the alcohol industry has been responding through their initiatives to the what they perceive as a challenge from the public health community. Up until 1999 or so, alcohol industry activities in the area of public health programs and public relations programs designed to draw attention to their good corporate citizenship were virtually non-existent. But as soon as discussions began in 2007, 2008 about the WHO global strategy, the alcohol industry conceivably, because of fears that this was going to lead to a framework convention on alcohol control similar to the tobacco convention, they began accelerating their activities in the areas of drink driving, server responsibility, underage drinking, responsible drinking campaigns, and corporate social responsibility, including the promotion of what they consider to be an indicator of corporate social responsibility, which is industry self-regulation of their marketing activities. A cartoon in The Guardian in 2012 ridiculed this approach. In the UK, the poster that this individual in the cartoon is carrying as he looks in the mirror says, "I hereby vow to sound tough about binge drinking." And it's this idea that the industry is doing things to sound tough, but they're really not doing very much. The global producers' commitments that were criticized in the statement of concern come down to 5 areas. They were supported and promoted by 11 of the world's leading alcohol producers and 2 major trade associations, and they were issued as ostensibly a response to the WHO global strategy, with the express intention of helping WHO to implement that strategy, even though they were never asked to do so. The producers promised to reduce underage drinking by 10%, strengthen self-regulatory marketing codes, reduce drinking and driving, act responsibly in the area of product innovation, and encourage retailers to reduce harmful drinking. GAPA's statement, after looking carefully at these commitments, took them to task because of the fact that they did not really appear to be able to do what they said they were going to do. And our statement of concern, when it was distributed through listservs throughout the public health community, NGOs, all possible avenues around the globe concerned with alcohol issues, we obtained within 1 month over 500 signatures from health professionals, health scientists, NGO representatives. These people came from more than 60 countries, and 28 organizations endorsed the statement. The list of signatories has grown to over 700 now, and both the statement and the endorsements were sent to the WHO Director General. The objections to the commitments were that they were based on questionable assumptions. They were weak, rarely evidence-based, and were considered to be unlikely to reduce harmful alcohol use. We also were concerned that the commitments are misrepresenting the roles of the global alcohol producers, referred to in the WHO global strategy as economic operators. With regard to the implementation of the WHO global strategy, we note that both the 2007 expert committee report to WHO and the subsequent interpretations of the global strategy gave no authority to the global producers to engage in public health activities on behalf of WHO. And despite that, they have issued over 2,500 activities that they say are doing what the global strategy is asking them to do. We based our skepticism as well on prior initiatives advanced by the alcohol industry as contributions to the global strategy, going back to the beginning of ICAP, which have been critiqued time and again for their superficiality and counterproductivity. In preparation for our meeting with the WHO Director General, we conducted a preliminary content analysis of a random sample of these 2,500 commitments that have been posted by the alcohol industry and are available on a link to the ICAP website. And we took a sample of 215 stratified by high and low income countries and did an objective content analysis. We found that 45% did not fit into any area described by the global strategy. Another 19% were too vague to classify. We found that only 7.5% could be considered to be evidence-based activities likely to have a positive impact on drinking behavior and alcohol-related problems. We found that most of these programs represent training programs by a particular company or media campaigns to promote responsible drinking or safe driving, and other activities that have not been evaluated or have not been found to be effective. In some cases, these were particularly ludicrous. One global action submitted and posted on the website in the form of a paragraph described a 60th anniversary celebration of a brewery as the industry's contribution to the global strategy, and I doubt that that was a celebration that had a toast with sparkling water. 39% of the actions were considered to have the potential to promote a brand or product, so their activities, which are ostensibly making the industry look good, such as a responsible drinking message, are often attached to the brand name, and in some cases to a promotion that contains a violation in the industry's own self-regulation code. So in some cases, these global actions are actually nothing else but part of an advertisement for their product. 50% were considered to pose a potential risk of harm. We evaluated these activities in terms of whether they might pose a risk. For example, giving alcohol to young people or encouraging young people, 16 years old, for example, to drink moderately as a method of preventing binge drinking in this group. And most of the activities lacked a systematic evaluation. Here are some examples, other examples. In Mozambique, SAB Miller began production of its Impala beer. So a new beer was listed as a contribution to the global strategy. They had inaugurated this beer by negotiating a 30% lower tax rate so it could compete with low alcohol content beers on the market and the informal market. But there's no evidence that lowering the taxes on beer to compete with informal beer will do anything but act as an additive rather than a supplement. Another initiative that was listed was Diageo launched its website to encourage visitors to oppose a litigation in the state of California against the alcohol industry for misrepresenting its the way its products are designed and in order to avoid taxes. So lobbying against a court case was considered a contribution to the WHO global strategy. And this goes on and on. There are other reasons to doubt the global producers' commitment. The alcohol industry's global strategy to increase alcohol availability. It appears from looking at the actions of the alcohol industry that they have their own global strategy, which I'll mention in a minute. Another is the growing evidence that alcohol problems are in part corporation-induced. There is now a growing literature on corporation-borne diseases, starting with diseases created by chemical agents like asbestos, but it goes on, and now it's being applied to products, dangerous consumption products like alcohol. And finally, self-regulation of alcohol marketing can be considered another reason to doubt the global producers' commitments, as I'll show in a minute. With regard to the industry's strategy to increase alcohol availability, it's both financial and political. The industry is becoming much more concentrated into multinational corporations, which are targeting the high population areas of the world, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And it's political in the sense that they're now delegating their political activities to organizations to make the political environment more conducive to liberal alcohol policies and more challenging to public health policies. Other things that they're doing are accelerated marketing activities, and particularly in the less resource countries of the world, new product design that is targeted at heavy drinkers and young people, partnerships with the NGOs and the public health community, which do not serve a useful public health purpose. I mentioned the global actions, their lobbying activities, as we've heard about yesterday, against effective alcohol policies, and a number of other activities. What we're looking at is a public health model where the alcohol industry is either an agent or a vector or a combination of the two, interacting with the environment to affect vulnerable populations. Evidence is accumulating that alcohol problems are corporation-induced, and their practices like product design and marketing and retail distribution and pricing are designed to increase consumption and to affect alcohol, and subsequently they're likely to affect alcohol misuse. This is tied to a theory of an epidemiologic cascade, which brings into the equation a set of factors. Most often we just look at alcohol and the host and look at how alcohol and the host interact to produce alcohol problems. But sometimes we include the environment as a factor, but we rarely consider how that environment is changed by corporate activities, both in terms of directly influencing the drinking environment, as well as how they affect the controls on that environment through the political process and government policies. And there are many examples, case studies. The case study of Finland is a good example where alcohol industry pressures affected the government to limit alcohol control policies, which led to an increase in a reduction in prices and an increase in alcohol-related problems. So the second thing about our skepticism is that the self-regulation codes of the alcohol industry are shown to be dysfunctional wherever they've been evaluated. Research in the US, in the European Union, in Brazil, now in a number of countries on the African continent, in Canada, Ireland, the UK, Australia, have all come to similar conclusions, that the industry's self-regulation code in terms of who should be exposed to alcohol marketing and voluntarily committing themselves to restrict exposure to adults, as well as the content of these codes, which are supposed to represent alcohol responsibly rather than associate it with sex or excitement or sports or success or other things. These codes are being systematically evaluated, and they're being found to be systematically violated. There have been several studies which more recently have documented this, a study just published in JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics, looked at alcohol advertisements or product placements in American movies over a 10-year or 11-year period. And what they found was that the product placements of alcohol products in these movies, particularly movies that are rated as being acceptable to young people, PG-13, were filled with alcohol product placements, and those product placements increased dramatically over a 10-year period. At the same time, they looked at product placements for tobacco, and what they found was that because of the master settlement and the activities around the Framework Convention on tobacco control, that product placements for tobacco had dropped dramatically. This provides a very, I think, dramatic comparison as to what can happen when you let an industry self-regulate its marketing as opposed to controlling it through statutory regulations. Similarly, in the same period, during the first roughly 10 years of the last 10 years, we at the University of Connecticut looked at beer ads and the content of those ads that were broadcast on national collegiate basketball games starting in 1999. And what we found was that depending on how strictly you interpreted the content code that the industry says it adheres to, the violation rates were between 35 and 74%. With Anheuser-Busch, now the world's largest beer producer, coming up as the leader in violating their own self-regulation codes. So we've also documented this now in a preliminary way with support from Ford in a study in Africa. 4 countries were evaluated in terms of their marketing activities, and we found high rates of violations, particularly in TV ads. The country with the lowest rate of violations was the Gambia, which was the only country that had statutory controls. So what we're looking at is looking upstream. We've got to go beyond looking at the immediate environment of the drinker to look at how that environment is influenced by government policies and corporate activities. And ultimately, the value of approaching alcohol policy within the framework of corporation-induced diseases or disorders or disabilities is that it forces us to look at what's happening up above. And that also, I think, leads us to the policies that are favored in the NCD initiatives and the WHO Global Strategy on Alcohol, which are regulating availability, pricing, and taxation controls in regulating alcohol promotion. What we're also talking about is bringing together different components of government, civil society, and the public health community into what might be considered a social movement. And a model for this is another triangle, which I became aware of during a visit to Thailand several years ago. And the metaphor is the triangle that moves the mountain. And here we've got 3 points. We need relevant knowledge through science that can help to inform policy so we don't make mistakes in terms of taking positions. But in order to have an effect on the political environment that affects alcohol problems through legislation and regulation, we need a social movement and to motivate civil society to take action. And I think another model related to this is Schmidt's work on the global health policy networks. These are networks of individuals and organizations working at a global level which share a concern for a particular health issue. And where it's been studied in tobacco, polio, TB, and now alcohol, we can get ideas about what it takes to have an impact on a global level on the population rates of these diseases, disorders, problems that are connected with particular toxic agents. And what we see is where it has been successful is that it includes scientists, health professionals, policymakers, victim groups, survivors, NGOs, faith groups, bringing all these groups together into a global health policy network or alliance. So what is needed to build a stronger policy alliance network? We need a proactive strategy. We need to mobilize powerful membership organizations. We need to frame the issues better so they're clear and we can articulate them better for the public. We need to build a broader coalition. We need financial support for core activities, which is seriously lacking in our area, and a positive message. With that, I'm going to refer you to perhaps what could be a beginning for this, which is the GAPA Statement of Concern. If you haven't signed it, you can go to the website and sign up and have your name included. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Thomas Weber, for such an informative speech. Time goes by very quick, so I would like to invite our second speakers, Dr. Evelyn Gillen. Dr. Evelyn Gillen is the Chief Executive of Alcohol Focus Scotland and Scotland's national alcohol charity. Prior to join the AFS, Evelyn was the director of Scottish Health Action on Alcohol Problem, an advocacy group established by the Scottish Medical Royal Colleges and faculties. So Dr. Evelyn Gillen will be talking on the topic of pricing policies to reduce harm, the Scottish experience. Evelyn?
I'm just going to get some technical help for 1 minute to move. Hang on. I think was there someone here to change the presentation? Yeah, thank you. It's always a struggle to follow Tom Baber. But what, absolutely, I'll do my best. But what I would like to share with you this morning, and I would like to thank GAPA for giving me the opportunity, is to share our experience in Scotland where we have tried to move that mountain a little bit in one quite small country where we have embarked on a journey which has sought to bring together the science, the political advocacy and the social movement building that we talked about and which we were first made aware of in the GAPA conference in Thailand. For those of you that don't know, Scotland is part of the United Kingdom. We have devolved powers, with some powers reserved to the English Parliament in Westminster. But one of the interesting things about devolution is that it has created an opportunity for policy divergence across the UK, particularly in the area of health policy. And what I'd like to do is talk to you about the journey that we've been on, focus particularly in trying to follow on from Tom on the role that public health advocacy has played in our journey. Just for background information for those of you, the United Kingdom has been suffering very high levels of alcohol harm. They have been increasing and only starting to level off in the last few years. But even with the levelling off of the alcohol harm in the United Kingdom, our harm is still at historically high levels. And what is particularly worrying about this is that it's the exact opposite of the trends that are happening in other big killer diseases, which the trends are going in the opposite direction. What was particularly worrying in Scotland, really, this was the graph that got people very concerned in Scotland. And you'll see from it that Scotland has gone from having one of the lowest liver cirrhosis death rates in Western Europe in 1960 to having one of the highest today. And that's quite important, because when we embark on our advocacy journey, then people often say, but hasn't it always been like this? No, it's not always been like this. And we have to use the historical data that is available to us to make that point. Our alcohol-related hospital discharges have quadrupled since the 1980s, with more than 100 Scots being hospitalised every day. And of course, the rising level of harm is linked to our increased alcohol consumption. I heard someone saying at the conference yesterday that the global average per capita consumption is just over 6 litres. In Scotland, we drink over 11 litres. And a key factor driving this increased consumption is the increasing affordability of alcohol. As alcohol has become more affordable, so our consumption has increased and our harm has followed on from that. So this is the context of rising harm, growing public and political concern that really created a climate for us in Scotland that enabled us to begin arguing and advocating for policy changes policy solutions that would be effective in reducing our high levels of harm. Of particular concern to us was the availability of very cheap alcohol. We know, and I found it fascinating, and this is one of the wonderful things about GAPA and the work that's done in conferences like this, is that we can hear that in countries like Bhutan, as we were hearing yesterday, they also have a problem with very cheap alcohol. I don't know if it was my own lack of knowledge, but somehow Bhutan was not a country that I imagined would have the similar issues. So we began advocating in Scotland for an alcohol strategy that would have reducing harm as its key objective, and began to construct a story to politicians and policymakers, a coherent narrative that talked about the most effective way to reduce harm is to reduce overall alcohol consumption in the population, and the best way to do that were controls, to implement controls on price and availability. And that was really the starting point for us. It was very important to reframe the way that alcohol problems were viewed in Scotland. There were two important developments in 2007 and 8. The policy report here on the right, Alcohol Price Policy and Public Health, was produced by Scottish Health Action on Alcohol Problems, a medical advocacy group established by the Medical Royal Colleges in Scotland. And I want to just emphasise how important the Medical Royal Colleges were and indeed continue to be in advocating and putting forward the public health case for alcohol control policies. Our government, we had a policy window when there was an election in Scotland and a new government was elected, where they decided, having listened to the arguments that we were putting forward in the public domain, that reducing alcohol harm should be the next key public health challenge for any Scottish government. I just want to say also that in that report, minimum pricing was central to that report. The Scottish Government was proposing introducing a 50p minimum unit price, and that was first articulated in the report by Sharp, where we said that minimum pricing, just for background information, also Scotland does not have taxation powers, so minimum pricing provided a good policy measure that would be effective in not only as a population measure, but also that it would be targeted specifically to those that drink the most. And our government's alcohol strategy document actually contained over 40 measures, of which I won't go into all of them due to time restraints, but there was never any suggestion that minimum pricing was the only action that you should take if you're serious about reducing harm, but there was a recognition that without controls on price, anything else that you did would be limited. We were greatly helped in our advocacy efforts by the work by the team at Sheffield University, who modelled the likely benefits of minimum unit pricing. They were, of course, attacked by the industry who claimed that as this was not real evidence, it should be not considered. Of course, when has the industry ever been interested in what constitutes real evidence? But just to cheer us up even further, following on from the excellent work from our colleagues at Sheffield, Tim Stockwell and his colleagues in Canada provided some real-life evidence on the impact of minimum pricing in Canada in 2 Canadian provinces. And what was particularly important for us was the fact that it showed that a 10% increase in the average minimum price was associated with a 32% reduction in wholly alcohol attributable deaths. And just to reinforce, GAPA's main strength is that it brings together the science and the advocacy. And from our point of view in Scotland, it was very important for us to be able to lodge our advocacy efforts in a sound scientific basis. A very brief comment on taxation versus minimum pricing, because this has come up before. The public health community in Scotland, and indeed the UK, has never said one or the other. We've also always made the point that taxation and minimum unit pricing are complementary and together would deliver the greater benefits rather than taxation alone, but they do different things. And relying on taxation to bring the price of the cheapest products up to the same level as a 50p minimum price would require duty increases of more than 600%. which we think would be problematic for even the most well-intentioned politicians. The other measures that I'll just give you a quick romp through here, we have, again, just showing the policy divergence that's happening in the UK at the moment. We have the same 4 licensing objectives in England as we do in Scotland, but Scotland has added a 5th one to protect and improve public health. We have banned happy hours in pubs, and then a few years later extended that ban to bulk discount buys in supermarkets and off sales. Our government has introduced a public health levy for large premises selling both alcohol and tobacco, and has recently announced, having sought the powers from Westminster, that they will be reducing drink driving limit. The government has also put a lot of money into a fairly big alcohol brief intervention and screening system. And as we are very concerned in GAPA to ensure the synergy between science and advocacy, you may be interested to know that there is a fairly comprehensive evaluation of Scotland's alcohol strategy that is currently being led by NHS Health Scotland. Just to bring this to a conclusion, the current status is that our Parliament has passed the minimum pricing legislation. Immediately, as Derek mentioned in his introduction yesterday, this was a policy commitment in the SNP's manifesto, and they did, unusually for politicians, follow through on that commitment when they were elected and managed to get support to get that through the Parliament. The Scotch Whisky Association, who represents the global alcohol producers, immediately announced that they would be mounting a legal challenge, and of course they are being supported in this action by their colleagues in Spirits Europe. The first hearing, Lord Docherty, the judge that presided over the hearing, found no grounds for the legal arguments that were being advanced by the lawyers acting for the Scotch Whisky Association. But of course that didn't stop them, and immediately that judgment was issued, they announced they would be appealing the decision. They have also been incredibly active in Europe and have managed to persuade about 12 European governments to write to the European Commission expressing their concern. And this is really just to provide a practical example of some of the theoretical stuff and the evidence that Tom was presenting in his in the previous presentation about the way that the industry operates. And basically what they did was lobbied very heavily and got these countries to write to the European Commission expressing concern. In some cases, for example, the submission by the Polish government was basically a cut and paste from a briefing from the Polish Brewers Group. What we subsequently discovered that many of the health ministries in those countries had no idea that their governments had submitted their concerns to the European Commission in this way. In seeking to delay the implementation of minimum pricing, of course, what the alcohol industry is doing is mirroring the tactics of tobacco, who were very successful in delaying public health measures which were subsequently found to save lives. And one of the roles one of the things that we have done in Scotland in our advocacy coalition, and we've really been very fortunate in Scotland because we've worked very closely together. Alcohol Focus Scotland, SHAP and the British Medical Association really form the nucleus of the Advocacy Coalition in Scotland, and one of our tasks has been to consistently draw comparisons between what the alcohol industry is doing in seeking to oppose the Scottish Government's proposal to the tactics of the tobacco industry. Unfortunately, they have been successful in taking minimum unit pricing off the table in England. We went from a position where the Prime Minister in England had announced that he was introducing minimum unit pricing, subsequently issued a consultation document and said, we've already decided we are doing this, we're only consulting on what the level should be. Lo and behold, some months later, suddenly that's no longer on the table, and the withdrawal of minimum pricing in England, it came at the same time that they announced that the Westminster Government would not be introducing plain packaging. Despite the fact that the work that had been done by myself and other colleagues led by the University of Stirling, we have been trying to work together as an advocacy coalition across the UK, and part of what we did was to produce this Health First evidence-based alcohol strategy, which I'm not going to talk about because my colleague Linda Bald is talking about this. Linda was heavily involved in writing this strategy, and we'll be talking about it later. But there's a slightly better situation in other parts of the UK, because Northern Ireland and Wales are currently looking at how they might introduce minimum unit pricing. And those of you who attended my colleague Colin Sheville's presentation from Balance in the northeast of England yesterday will know that the action in the northeast and the northwest of England by local authorities to introduce minimum unit pricing has actually been extremely effective. We're working basically on a pincer movement in the UK and trying to get everywhere around England moving ahead. And just to conclude, really, in terms of what might the lessons be from our experience in Scotland, I think the first thing we would say is, certainly in our own country, and it will depend on where other countries are in their own development, but a critical advocacy task for us was to reframe the problem, to expose the tactics of the alcohol industry, particularly, and I think just to reiterate what Tom said, I think what we have to do more effectively and more consistently in our own community is to expose the role of the alcohol industry in both sustaining consumption and the consequent problems associated with that. And so I actually think the idea of the corporation-induced epidemic is such an important theoretical framework for us, and it was very influential for us in Scotland. The enabling factors for us, I've already mentioned the importance of the science. To all the scientists here, please try and make your science policy advocacy relevant. I know that those of you that are here do, and we greatly benefit from that. Consistent messaging was important for us. I stress again the importance of effective advocacy coalitions. But ultimately, none of this really would have happened if we hadn't had political leadership. And I was very struck by Serena's comment in the workshop that I was at yesterday about her health minister saying you need to do something. And we had a similar situation where we had one minister who just decided it was going to be his political priority. And sometimes in advocacy, you have to be ready to move when a window opens up in the political environment. I think, just to follow on from what Tom says, that we're almost at a tipping point now. We did face challenges in Scotland, but what has been in some ways inspiring for me being here, GAPA conferences are always inspiring because you get the opportunity to hear from people in countries that you would never otherwise hear from. But what has really come over very clearly for me is that we are facing the same challenges. Whether it is us in Scotland in dealing with the industry's efforts to stop minimum pricing, our colleagues in South Africa, who you're about to hear from Charles, our colleagues in Bhutan, who are trying to do it through their local advocacy. But we are at a tipping point, and we have reached, certainly in the Western countries, reached a point where governments are starting to want to introduce alcohol control policy. And I think for us, the globalised nature of the alcohol industry and the advantages that gives them, both in terms of their marketing spend and the resources they can put into lobbying, has to be met by a similarly coordinated effort by the global scientific, public health and NGO community. And I think GAPA and its affiliated organisations across the globe really are perfectly positioned to help us take this forward. And importantly, to keep providing opportunities for us to share knowledge, to learn from each other. And I would be very interested, and I hope we get the chance, I'm sure we will as the day progresses, in hearing from conference delegates about how you think we can increase our efforts, build our own capacity as a global community to resist the damage that's been done by alcohol. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evelyn Gillen. Perhaps most of you may not know that on Sunday the 6th, the GAPA board had a meeting all day here, and one of the agenda on the GAPA board meeting was to decide where and who will be the next host for the next GAPA conference in 2015. And I'm glad to tell you all that Dr. Evelyn Gillen and the Alcohol Focus Scotland and the Ministry of Health Scotland is willing to host the next GAPA conference 2015 in the beautiful city of Edinburgh, Scotland. So we will all go to Scotland in the next 2 years to support her goodwill. Now come to the third speaker, keynote speaker today, Professor Charles Perry. Professor Charles is the director of the South African Medical Research Council's Alcohol and Drug Abuse Research Unit. He has been appointed as extraordinary professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Stellenbosch University. He also served as the acting vice president at the South African Medical Research Council. And Professor Charles Perry is also on the board of GAPA. He'll be talking about progress on the South African alcohol advertising ban.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today. I'm going to be covering various points in relation to the topic of my presentation. I'm first going to talk about drinking and alcohol marketing in South Africa, and controls on alcohol advertising in that country. Then provide a brief chronology of state action to impose a ban on alcohol advertising in South Africa, industry action opposing an alcohol advertising ban, support for an alcohol advertising ban from civil society, which is in contrast to the industry opposition. I'm going to briefly mention the Control of Marketing of Alcoholic Beverages Bill, which was approved by Cabinet about 10 days ago, and looking forward, providing some reflections on the battle that waits us. If we look at South Africa, many people don't drink, but per capita consumption of alcohol is amongst the highest in the world when we look at the drinkers. South Africa, represented by the black line, indicates there are 34.9 liters of pure alcohol per drinker per year. And there are only 4 other countries in this chart which have amounts greater than that among the drinkers. So we have certainly a high drinking population when we look at the drinkers. But strangely enough, South African SAB Miller's Mark Bowman is not impressed with our consumption levels. He wants to increase this further. Bowman says that people on the African continent, excluding South Africa, consume only 8 liters of commercial beer per person per year, and he intends to increase this to 30 liters per person per year over the next 20 years. So what he wants to do is to bring everybody up to the level of South Africa. And I've made him long and thin on the left there to represent the narrow economic interests of the liquor industry. What are people drinking in South Africa? Well, you can see 57% of the market is natural beer, followed by 19% being spirits and 14% natural wine. And this excludes commercially and non-commercially produced sorghum beer or other homemade or informally produced products. And they comprise about 26% of the market, of which 2/3 is unrecorded. When we look at advertising, about 34 billion South African rands, which is about $3.5 billion US, is spent per year, and about 5.3% of that comes from alcohol advertising. And as you can see, that's increasing over time, and alcohol advertising comprises the 7th largest ad spend category in the country, above food. So it's certainly something that the advertisers also have an interest in what's happening around the alcohol advertising ban. When we look at the share of types of beverages in total alcoholic beverage advertising expenditure, you'll see the red line at the top is beer, which is the largest proportion of the advertising expenditure, and over time has shown an increase, although it's slightly leveling off. You will see that spirits spending on advertising has decreased, and that's the black line. The red dotted line is ciders, alcoholic fruit beverages, and RTDs. Showed a decline, but now an increase, and over time the advertising expenditure on wine has decreased. So the beer producers are the largest part of the advertising market. Where is the spending going? Well, a lot of it goes below the line in terms of sports sponsorship and other things. But when we look at above the line alcohol advertising, 74% of that is spent on television, and about 9% on radio, followed by cinema and so on. The next slide shows the derived quantities of pure alcohol consumed in South Africa between 1960 and 2012, and comes from a slide that I obtained from the University of Cape Town's Department of Economics. The red line again shows, and this is in quantity of pure alcohol in millions of liters, that beer over time has shown quite a dramatic increase in the pure alcohol consumed. The next line, in fact, is the spirits, although the graph says, the legend says wine. So spirits has shown an increase over time, and wine is fairly stable. I've said that drinking is quite high among the people who consume alcohol in South Africa. We also have to look at the pattern of drinking. How are they drinking that? And this slide from the World Health Organization shows, if you look to the bottom there, South Africa is shaded in purple, which indicates that more than 30% of male drinkers in the last year engage in heavy episodic drinking. And it's very much the same for women. Many of the drinkers, about a third of them, engage in binge drinking over weekends. So that's the kind of drinking climate we have in South Africa and the context for the government policy action that I'm going to talk about. What is the burden of harm? And I think Evelyn also mentioned that we need to have good science, we need to have good data to influence policy. This is from an article that appeared in the South African Medical Journal in 2007, which showed that alcohol was the third largest risk factor for death and disability in the year 2000. In fact, Jürgen Rehm, in a later study, reported it to be 6.3%. In the earlier study, was 7% of the total burden of death and disability is due to alcohol. And if we look at where that burden is distributed in terms of disability-adjusted life years lost, that's years lost because people die early or because they live with an alcohol-related disability, you'll see that the highest category is intentional and unintentional injuries. Of all alcohol's burden, about 40% comes from its link with injuries, followed by infectious diseases such as TB and HIV. And then the third category is non-communicable diseases, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, and liver cirrhosis. So that's the background, how much people are drinking, what some of the burden is, what they're drinking in South Africa. Let's look now at controls on alcohol advertising. Advertising is permitted on radio, TV, and cinemas and outdoors, and it's subject to the Industry Association for Responsible Alcohol Uses Code. This is not an independent code. ARA is a front organization for the liquor industry in South Africa. The ARA code specifies that adverts may not be transmitted in commercial breaks immediately before, during, or immediately after children's programs. It prohibits a range of activities such as adverts that appeal to young people. It prohibits the inclusion of youth under 25 drinking alcohol in advertisements, special promotion of higher alcohol content beverages, the promotion of aggressive or antisocial behavior, and promoting the alcohol strength of the beverage as the principal subject of the label. If we look at television adverts, and I'll just refer to that here because of time, the ARA code on paper does not allow programs with says that programs with a verifiable 30% or more viewership of persons under the age of 18 may not contain alcohol beverage advertisements. It also specifies that alcohol beverage advertisements may not be flighted between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock on Mondays to Fridays, as though children go to bed at 5 o'clock and won't see any advertisements. Clearly, look, I'll show you one advertisement here, which was outside Cape Town with Table Mountain in the background. It says, Grootman of Laiti, that's in the Afrikaans language, and it means big man or wimp. And it's showing a 750 milliliter bottle of a black label beer. And it's basically saying that if you're a wimp, you'll drink the 340 milliliter container. But big men drink the big container, which is about 2.5 standard drinks. A study undertaken by colleagues of mine at the Medical Research Council looked at did a content analysis of television food advertisements aimed at adults and children in South Africa and found the majority of the alcohol advertisements, 93 of them, that's 67%, fell within children and family viewing periods and were endorsed by celebrities. Clearly, I mean, these are just two examples showing that what we know, that self-regulation is not working in South Africa. I'd now like to turn briefly to a chronology of state action to impose a ban on alcohol advertising in the country. First of all, in 2010, the Minister of Health proposed a ban. In March 2011, there was the second biennial substance abuse summit was held in Durban, and from the floor, there was a resolution in favor of the ban. The Control of Alcoholic Beverages Bill was leaked in April 2012 by the liquor industry. Later that year, the Department of Health prepared a briefing to support the alcohol advertising ban. Then colleagues within the Department of Health went to some great lengths to address concerns over job losses that might occur. They prepared a briefing on that. The bill was approved by the Interministerial Committee, which comprises 12 ministries in the government of South Africa. And then it became clear that there was not unity within government. Particularly the sports ministry was unhappy because they would be losing money that would go to sports development. And so Treasury was asked to look into alternative ways to fund sports and arts. And the bill was presented to Cabinet in September, and a few weeks ago, the bill was approved by Cabinet. Let me go back a little bit now and delve into that chronology. We have there the President of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, speaking at the Biennial Substance Abuse Summit, which I believe included, I was there, but I think 8 cabinet ministers and the President attended the summit, so there was a lot of political support. And there were 35 resolutions that came from the floor. Resolution number 21 stated that there needs to be the immediate implementation of current laws and regulations that permit the restriction of the time, location, and content of advertising related to alcohol, and in the medium term, banning of all advertising of alcoholic products in public and private media, including the electronic media. Resolution 22 states that what needs to happen is banning of all sports sponsorships by the alcohol industry, sponsorships for sports, recreation, arts, cultural, and related events. And obviously there was a lot of action prior to this meeting to make sure these resolutions came from the floor. But I believe the government has really been encouraged and took encouragement from the fact that there was widespread support. And I think it really enables them to move forward, saying that this came from the floor of a very large national conference as being something that people were urging the government to do. Further to government thinking, on the right is the Chief Director for Non-Communicable Diseases, Professor Melvin Freeman. And he has stated that the Department of Health believes that advertising leads to increased consumption and that people respond to alcohol advertisements, not just the brand. This results in increased alcohol consumption and therefore increased harm. Advertising starts people drinking at a younger age, as adverts make the product seem attractive and glamorous. From an ethical point of view, it's wrong to allow the product to be promoted and advertised, as they do not cause any harm. This is unethical. So that's one of the viewpoints the government has, is that advertising is unethical in that it reaches young people. He believes that should we so allow the promotion and marketing of a product that we know is insidious. Moreover, a select number of people will have little option but to drink to dangerous levels due to addiction of the product. That's something we don't often hear about. The product is addictive and some people find it difficult to control. The industry will say that it is not the drink but the drinker that is dangerous. We think that because of the nature of the product, it's both. And that's exactly saying what Evelyn was saying. It's the product as well as the person who drinks it. Alcohol is no ordinary commodity. We've heard that term before, and therefore needs different approaches. On the left, I have the picture of the Minister of Social Development, and she has stated that the alcohol and advertising industries, on the other hand, would want us to ignore best practice and evidence garnered from local and international experts, and have us focus on the one area that has been shown in research to be the least effective, that is, public education. So it's good to know that our ministers are reading the documents that we send through to them. In August 2013, that's just a couple of months ago, the Draft Control of Marketing of Alcoholic Beverages Bill was approved, as I said, by the Interministerial Substance Abuse Committee. And in their press release, they stated that the government cannot ignore harms any longer. And they referred to the economic costs, the road deaths, crime, and violence. So this is really in support of those researchers who've been doing work for many years in these areas. And they stated that industry efforts to curb harms are not working. And when I heard Tom Babor's presentation saying that the industry was promising to do all these things, I said, well, they've had the chance to do that many years, and why are they now saying they're going to control underage drinking and so on? And here we have a government saying that industry efforts are not working. Why should we give them more time? I'm now going to refer very briefly to action by the industry and related others opposing an alcohol advertising ban. And you'll see I have a question mark there because I don't know how independent these others are. People from the advertising industry, from the freedom of expression foundations and so on. I believe in South Africa, there's very much a concerted effort pushed by the industry to have these other people bring forward what they also want to say. And I'm going to just read from a number of newspaper headlines over the last few years. And I don't have time to read the content, but I think you'll get that from the headlines. Heading for a nanny state. Drink makers oppose ad ban. Banned booze ads will only affect the economy badly. Curbing alcohol abuse by banning ads is like trying to cure AIDS with beetroot. Advertising lessons from apartheid and the Nazis. Well, that's the first time we've been linked to the Nazi regime. Banning alcohol advertising, not the answer. Experts. Benefit of ban on liquor advertising, dubious at best. Aaron Motsoaledi, that's our Minister of Health. Nanny from hell. And then I would like to read, on the right-hand side, there's a picture of Vincent Mapai, who's an executive member of South African Breweries, who he and I have a long-standing battle, and I've received hate mail from him, but this is what he's written in the newspaper. Scientific opinion on these issues is not uniform, and it creates an opportunity for both sides to be selective in the evidence they employ to advance their opinions. This tendency is worrying if evident among those who peddle their doctrines from disarmingly respectable academic positions. And I know who he was pointing his guns at there. And this explains why industry critics who adopt this prohibitionist approach are opposed to engaging with the liquor industry. And you'll see that he's gone very far from the truth. Many of us are not propagating prohibition. And he calls us peddlers, linking us to sort of drug dealers. But that will not stop our efforts. You've heard, many of you from Soul City, Severa Kaladin spoke twice yesterday, and I'll talk more about their efforts in a minute. In an open letter to a newspaper in January 2013, Tsepo Matsepe, who's the co-owner of the advertising company Kena Media, spearheaded opposition to the advertising ban. Not only did he submit this open letter, and I'll read you one paragraph, but he organized a petition against the ban, garnering over 9,300 signatures to submit to Parliament. And I'm just going to read you point 7 of this letter here, which was aimed at Severa, and I'm sure she's somewhere here in the audience. There you are. You need to be aware that South Africans have decided to roll up their sleeves and work for their own development in this regard. We have decided to do away with NGOs of your ilk that commercialize our plight by converting our developmental challenges into donor fund fodder. So they're saying you're involved in fighting the liquor ban because you can get donor aid in this way. It was a very cheap shot, and I don't think anybody really believed it. Spearheading the liquor industry's attack on the alcohol advertising ban was a report which came out in June 2013 by the independent organization Econometrics, and the title of the report is Liquor and Advertising. Would a ban help to reduce abuse? And are there unintended consequences? Which is what the industry's main point is. And you'll notice at the bottom there the logo of the Industry Association for Responsible Alcohol Use. But nowhere else in this document does it indicate that this report was sponsored by the Industry Association for Responsible Alcohol Use. I'd like to take you through selected arguments from the liquor industry and others against the ad ban, because I think you will experience these yourselves if you take on the liquor industry. First, they say there's no clear evidence of a link between alcohol advertising and consumption. With regard to youth drinking, they say that advertising is not important. What is parental education, poverty, and unemployment. They refer to various negative effects of the alcohol advertising ban. For example, its harm to the economy in terms of job losses, black economic empowerment, etc. They claim that 12,000 jobs will be lost, 7 billion rand impact on the gross domestic product, as though if there's no alcohol advertising, the money won't get spent anywhere else. They talk about losses in personal freedoms and consumers' ability to make informed choices. They say that if there's no advertising, consumers will pay more. It will hurt the sports and also the arts, that existing big brands will benefit. It'll hurt new entrants. It'll be anti-competitive. But then I'm confused. Why would South African breweries be so determined to kill this ban if they are the dominant player in the market? I just don't get it. It'll promote an illicit liquor market because people won't know where to buy legal alcohol, so they'll run to the illicit market, and it won't address the harms. They also say that people buy drugs, and yet there's no overt advertising of drugs. They say that some countries have recently rescinded their advertising bans, and they say in some countries like New Zealand, alcohol advertising is increasing, yet consumption is declining. They indicate that 60% of South Africans don't drink despite advertising. Therefore, advertising can't be that powerful. But what about its effect on those who do drink? They don't bother to talk about that. They say we cannot learn from the tobacco advertising ban. In particular, there's no burgeoning cell phone industry to take up the advertising space that will be there if alcohol is banned. They say that proven approaches to addressing alcohol problems include improved education, good enforcement, and strong self-regulation. Well, they obviously haven't heard Tom Baber's presentation where he refuted self-regulation, and also the systematic reviews looking at the effects of education. South African Breweries believes that the focus should be only on drinking patterns associated with harm on the individual who misuses their product, and that intervention will not stop with tobacco and alcohol. It's going to be a slippery slope. People will turn to food and other stuffs. Yes, that will be the case. I can guarantee that. Another headline was no quick fixes to alcohol abuse. A couple more. Alcohol ban will hurt the economy, says the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Booze ad ban. South Africa will lose 6 billion rand. Booze ad ban could backfire. Throw off our nappies and rein in those nannies. That's enough of that. Let me talk about support for the ban by civil society very briefly. Firstly, to indicate that this advert that I referred to, Big Man or Wimp, many of us engaged a petition against it, and the Advertising Standards Authority accepted South African breweries' withdrawal of billboards. But so that was a positive thing, But the trouble was the billboard was allowed to stay up for a long period of time, and South African Breweries was not really censured. In fact, it was praised for withdrawing its advertising in response to the criticism, not for putting up the advert in the first place. So clearly there are problems. Soul City has been very active in supporting the alcohol advertising ban, and there was a presentation on this yesterday, through buying advertising space in the Mail and Guardian, hosting a critical thinking forum, conducting research, and so many other things. This is one of the advertorials that they placed, which was titled Advertising Fuels Consumption. In the South African Medical Journal, I wrote an article which was published last year with colleagues titled A Total Ban on Alcohol Advertising Presenting the Public Health Case, and it's been gratifying to see government ministers take material from this 3-page editorial. Other articles in Business Day Live, good case for a total ban on alcohol advertising. This was a letter written by myself and some colleagues. Another article was ban in good spirits. And in the Cape Times, ban booze adverts and reduce harm. So there were some articles in favor, but much fewer. And then I've also been involved in conducting a Cochrane review looking at the evidence base for an advertising ban. Also, what I've done is, with some colleagues, is to take the econometrics report and pull it apart section by section. And on the right, you will see an article that was published in the Star newspaper, a letter written by myself and Leslie London, in which we did this. And here we break down all these arguments one by one. We indicate that the report was commissioned by the industry. It sought to deflect problems away from the regulated to the unregulated sector. It tries to blame alcohol problems on a small minority of users. It claims that South Africa is a mature alcohol market and should not be strongly regulated, which is not the case. It deflects the view that advertising is used to attract new drinkers. While the econometrics report admits that a ban on alcohol advertising will not result in R0 advertising expenditure, it then assumes that above the line and below the line ad spend on alcohol will be zero if there is a total ban, and use this in calculation of the job losses, which is a complete fallacious thing to do. And it cites old references to support the view that there is inconclusive evidence for an effect of advertising on alcohol consumption. More recent studies point to a consistent association. It weights studies equally, regardless of their quality, size, or scope. And by looking at local trend data on ad spend on consumption from WHO data over a 7 to 8 year period, they claim that there's no link between the two. They ignore the complexities that are likely to exist, for example, differences by age. If they'd looked at other data sources, they would probably have come up with different conclusions. They claim that a ban on alcohol advertising will have a 7.4 billion rand impact on gross domestic product. And I've said spending is going to occur elsewhere. And the solutions they put forward to addressing alcohol abuse, such as increasing the education of consumers and limiting alcohol advertising on radio and TV till after 9 p.m., have been shown to be effective. In the latter case, some research by David Jernigan. Almost done now. I'd like to refer to the Control of Marketing of Alcoholic Beverages Bill, which was approved by Cabinet 3 weeks ago on the 18th of September. The preamble for this legislation refers to Section 27 of the South African Constitution. It says that the state is to take on reasonable legislative and other measures to protect the health and well-being of the population. The objectives of the bill are to contribute to the reduction of alcohol-related harm and protection of public health and community well-being by limiting the exposure of public to alcohol marketing, by restricting the advertisement of alcoholic beverages, by prohibiting any sponsorship associated with alcoholic beverages, and prohibiting any promotion of alcoholic beverages. And if you see the bill, you'll see it's very detailed. While it doesn't specifically refer to internet advertising, it's broad enough to include that, but we need to make sure that they even tighten this legislation. Restrictions on the advertising bill do allow, however, for notices describing the price, brand name, type, strength, origin, and composition of the product at the point of sale, but it must not be visible from outside the premises. So that's all that it's going to allow. It will allow vehicles to transport alcohol to have their logo on them, but nothing else, the logo of the producer. Second last slide, the government realizes that banning alcohol advertising alone won't be sufficient. It's also looking at decreasing allowable blood alcohol levels in drivers to 0.02 grams per 100 milliliters. It wants to raise the drinking age to 21 years and wants to license illegal liquor outlets. There's a huge battle ahead. Let's not assume that we've won the victory. I mean, the UK case with minimum pricing is a case in point. Big battle ahead. The Medical Research Council, Seoul City, and others, we will testify in Parliament in support of the ban and specifically refute the industry's arguments, and we're going to call upon many of you to assist us in this regard. The government recognizes the need to compensate sporting bodies in some way for the loss of sports sponsorships. And there are plans to establish a health promotion foundation in South Africa, building on the example of Thai Health Foundation, which, among other things, will promote alternative messaging about alcohol. And if we can get funding for this, we will also use some of the money to support sports development. The Medical Research Council, as I said, is completing a Cochrane review, looking at the effectiveness of alcohol advertising bans in decreasing consumption and harm. The evidence is not that strong from this Cochrane review, so we're going to be recommending a proper evaluation of the South African advertising ban so that we can strengthen the evidence base for global policy making in this area. My last slide. Why does South Africa's proposed advertising ban matter to you? And this is an editorial that came out in 2013. The main author is David Jernigan, who's with us here, and he spells out why this is important globally. And I think in closing, we need to understand that Africa and Asia and probably Latin America are in the industry's sights for their expansion. They're not getting much expansion in Europe and North America, and they're investing heavily in building new plants, particularly beer factories in these countries. And the newspaper advert says there, newspaper article says South African SAB Miller plans $2.5 billion investment in Africa, and this was dated August this year. SAB Miller plans to invest up to $2.5 billion in Africa over the next 5 years to build and revamp breweries. Its regional head office said on Monday, and it looks to slake the rising demand for beer in the fast-growing continent, as if this interest in drinking beer is just coming from grassroots up. Advertising is going to play a key role in that, and if we can stop this in South Africa, perhaps we can create the tipping point to stop advertising of alcohol throughout Africa, Asia, and other countries in the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Perry. I'm afraid that our time is up, so there's no time left for Q&A. Perhaps all the three distinguished speakers will be around for the coffee break. So some of you may have some questions in your mind. You can approach them and talk to them in person. So thank you very much. And now there will be some housekeeping announcement.